What kind of man beheads 144 people and believes God told him to? Not a soldier, not a criminal. A salaried government employee who wore a tailcoat to work, collected a fixed fee per execution, and once had to be warned by officials to stop giving the Nazi salute mid-beheading. His name was Karl Gröpler, and for nearly 30 years he was the man Germany called when it needed someone to die. But here is what the history books rarely ask. What made a man like this? Not a fanatic. Is not a sadist, a former postal worker and laundry owner who stumbled into state execution and never left. Because the most disturbing thing about Karl Gröpler was not the axe he carried. It was how ordinary he was. Karl Gröpler was born on February 22, 1868, in Magdeburg, a working-class city in the Kingdom of Prussia. His father was a railway worker. His mother kept the household. There was nothing remarkable about his childhood, and that is precisely the point. As a young man, Gröpler tried everything. He trained as a musician, then became a postal worker for 5 years, then a horse butcher. Then he ran a steam laundry in Magdeburg. The laundry failed, and that failure, that single moment of financial desperation, set everything else in motion. Looking for stable income, Gröpler entered the Prussian justice system as an assistant to the state executioner. He learned the work quietly, methodically. When the sitting executioner was abruptly dismissed in 1906 for accounting irregularities, Gröpler stepped into the role without fanfare. No grand ambition, no ideology. Just a man who needed a job and happened to be standing in the right place. But what he picked up that day wasn't just a title. It was an axe, and he would carry it for the next 3 decades. Gröpler was not casual about his work. He was precise, ritualistic, almost ceremonial. Every execution followed the same pattern. He was tradition, and Gröpler treated was tradition, and Gröpler treated tradition like law. Officials sometimes pushed back. The formal attire looked outdated. They wanted something more modern. Gröpler refused. He also prayed. Before executions, he told prison officers that he could not carry out his duties without believing in God. He cited biblical commandments to justify capital punishment. In his mind, the axe was not a weapon. It was an instrument of divine order, wielded on behalf of the state. In April 1924, that belief was formalized into paperwork. Gröpler signed a contract making him the sole executioner for northern Germany. Monthly salary, 136 gold marks, plus a fixed fee for every execution performed, plus additional payments for his assistants. It was, by every measure, a government job. And like any government employee, he showed up. He did the work. He went home. All but the work was about to get much, much busier. During the Weimar Republic, executions slowed almost to a stop. Political debate turned against the death penalty. Gröpler went months without work. For a man whose entire income depended on state-ordered deaths, the silence was a financial crisis. Then, 30 January 1933 arrived. Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Within weeks, the machinery of the state shifted. Political enemies were arrested. Opposition was dismantled. And execution orders began moving through the system again. Gröpler renewed his contract in February 1933. His new annual salary, 1,500 Reichsmarks. Fixed fee per execution, 50 Reichsmarks. The paperwork was clean, institutional, unremarkable. But it was during this period that something strange was reported. Gröpler began giving the Nazi salute during execution procedures. Not before, not after, during. Officials issued formal warnings. Who simply believed in what the regime was doing, and saw no reason to separate that belief from his work, which raises a question no official document ever answered. Where exactly did the ritual end and the ideology begin? By the mid-1930s, Gröpler had carried out executions across northern Germany with quiet consistency. But 3 cases would define his legacy and ultimately destroy it. The first was Peter Kürten. Kürten had terrorized the city of Düsseldorf in the late 1920s. His crimes included the murder of children and adults through strangulation, stabbing, and bludgeoning. The press called him the Vampire of Düsseldorf. The public demanded justice. On July 2, 1931, at Cologne's Klingelputz prison, Gröpler carried out the sentence by guillotine. The city exhaled. Gröpler collected his fee and moved on. But the second case was more complicated. In May 1934, Gröpler beheaded 4 men in Hamburg: Johnny Detmer, Alfred Werenberg, Hermann Fischer, and Arthur Schmidt, all convicted communists, all executed with the hand axe. An eyewitness later described the motion: the axe raised, then dropped, then drawn back in a single practiced stroke. Clean, efficient, practiced. But it was the third case that crossed a line even the Nazi regime could not ignore. 2 women, a baroness, a prison in Berlin, and an international scandal that forced Hitler himself to intervene. On the 18th of February 1935, 2 women were brought to Berlin Plötzensee prison: Baroness Benita von Falkenhayn and her friend Renate von Natzmer, both convicted of espionage and treason by the People's Court, both sentenced to death. Gröpler carried out the executions by hand axe. The foreign press erupted. A baroness, a member of the German aristocracy, beheaded with an axe in a Nazi prison. The images the story conjured were medieval, barbaric, and they landed on front pages across Europe and beyond. The outrage was not about the conviction. It was about the method. Within weeks, Adolf Hitler issued a personal decree. From that point forward, all executions across the Reich were to be carried out by hanging or guillotine. The hand axe, the Richtbeil, was retired permanently from German execution practice. A tool Gröpler had carried for nearly 30 years, it banned by the man whose regime had employed him. But the scandal did not end Gröpler's career immediately. He continued working, quietly, methodically, until his own body and a single moment of poor judgment finally caught up with him. And what happened next cost him everything. In 1936, concerns were raised after an execution went wrong. The axe struck above the intended point. The procedure, by all accounts, was not clean. Alcohol consumption was suspected. For a man whose entire professional identity rested on precision and ritual, it was a devastating accusation. No formal charges were filed, but the damage was done. By 1937, after approximately 30 years of service and at least 144 executions, Karl Gröpler was forced into retirement. He returned to Magdeburg, quietly, without ceremony. His pension was insufficient. He struggled financially, the same problem that had driven him into execution work 3 decades earlier. Then an opportunity emerged. Publishers abroad were willing to pay handsomely for his memoirs. His story, 30 years of state executions told from the inside. German authorities moved immediately to block it, and then, almost certainly, quietly increased his pension to ensure his silence. A man who had served the state faithfully for 30 years was now a liability, something to be managed, contained. He disappeared into obscurity in Magdeburg, and for 8 years, the world forgot about Karl Gröpler, until 1945. when the Soviets came knocking at his door. In 1945, Nazi Germany collapsed. The war ended, and Soviet military authorities began working through lists of names connected to the regime's machinery of violence. Karl Gröpler's name was on one of those lists. He was 77 years old when they arrested him at his home in Magdeburg. The specific charge was never made fully public, but the timing pointed directly to one event: the 1934 executions of 4 communist men in Hamburg. Men whose political movement had now, 11 years later, inherited the power to settle accounts. There was no trial on record, no sentence formally documented, no public verdict. Just an old man, taken into custody by a foreign military authority in the city where he was born, and never released. Karl Gröpler died in Soviet custody on the 30th of January 1946. So exactly 13 years to the day after Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, the same date that had set everything in motion. He had served 2 regimes, outlived both, and was ultimately consumed by the consequences of work he had always described as routine: 144 executions, 30 years of service, one date that bookended everything, and somewhere in a Soviet record, a file that has never been fully opened.